Welcome to Left, East, West with me, Tom Parkin.
And me, Nikki Hill. Glad that you are here for our fourth show, and please subscribe and tell other people about Left, East to West. Before we start our show today, we do want to acknowledge that we are airing just days after a tragic incident in Tumbler Ridge, BC. And I'm sure this has been seen across the country because it's been seen globally as well. So as a British Columbian, we have just seen the province, the country, and the world respond so immediately with an outpouring of love and support for this very small community in northern BC. And for the most part, we'll talk about other responses later. But for the 8 victims, the 5 young children, a teacher, family members who all deserve our focus today and in the weeks and months ahead, and our unwavering support in this very tight-knit community. Our hearts are with you, Tumbler Ridge.
Yeah, an awful tragedy. Obviously deeply scarring to everybody touched by it. I
It
know you want to
is,
say more
yes.
about it later in the show, Nikki. Yeah.
Yeah, I do have some other thoughts, but we'll get to later. But first, let's go to our Below the Fold. We're going to touch on the Ontario Liberal leadership troubles. We're also going to talk about Canadian bids for the Global Defence Bank.
Then we'll bring you our interview with Bynn Bourke. She's the executive director of the BC Building Trades, and we'll talk about the skilled trades trainings being pushed because of high demand as major projects and housing infrastructure top the political agenda in British Columbia.
It's a great interview, but let's first check in a couple places across Canada with Looking Below the Fold. So, Tom, last week we talked about the trouble with the Ontario Liberals are having getting a new leader in place, but I think we have an update here. What's it
Yeah,
looking like?
little update. The Ontario Liberals last week finally set a date for their leadership vote, and it is November the 9th. 14 months since
Is it
well,
February right now? Yes.
it is they announced this on February the 9th, and it will be November the 9th, 14 months since their last leader, Bonnie Crombie, announced her resignation. And just for contrast, Doug
Right.
Ford became leader after a 3-month race. Marit Stiles, NDP leader, won after an 8-month race. So this is a lot. But
Okay.
the Liberals keep delaying because nobody is saying that they want the job. 10 days ago, MP Evan Baker said no. That is nobody except Nate Erskine Smith, who has been making it clear for months that he does want the job, but the party doesn't want him, especially after he took some very public shots at Mark Carney when the Prime Minister dumped him from
Right.
cabinet after just a 4-month stint, returning Erskine Smith to the government backbench where he'd been for 10 years. Nate Erskine Smith called Carney disrespectful and said his demotion didn't sit right. And so the Liberals punted the decision 9 months down the road, hoping someone will come along to save them from their Nate fate. There is also this Scarborough Southwest by-election coming, and Nate, remember, he's a federal MP, has said
Yeah.
he'll run. And if he wins, he bolsters his claim on the Ontario Liberal leadership. If he loses, his campaign is probably dead on arrival. So, Nikki, do you think maybe there's some unusual cross-party alignment of interests in this one?
Yeah, there's a lot lining up. I'm wondering from what you said too, if the Liberals are going to be happy to lose this because it
Yeah,
solves their NAEP problem in the leadership race.
right, exactly. A friend of mine who was a minister's assistant in the McGuinty and Wynne era once told me that the glue that holds the Ontario Liberals together is that they hate each other just a little bit less than they hate the PCs or the NDP. Now, this might be the exception, and they're going to lose. And if they're going to lose this thing, they'd probably prefer to lose it to the PCs than the NDP, for sure. So
Yeah.
Mars Styles has to be aware of that. Premier Forty says he's in no rush to call the by-election. I guess happy to watch Liberals fight Liberals for a little while longer. And NDP leader Marit Stiles is being pictured out canvassing with a group of volunteers in the riding over the last couple of weekends. So let's keep checking on this one. It's a lot of dynamics, and there's lots of riding on the outcome for both the Liberals and the New Democrats.
And months ahead for it. So
Yeah. Now, Nikki, I saw that BC made a big announcement last week trying to secure the hotly sought after Global Defence Bank, but I'm also seeing other Canadian provinces vying. What do we know about this hot topic? What's so big about this
yeah.
Global Defence Bank?
Yeah, I mean, we're having a true west to east issue here. So we have Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver all competing for this distinction. But I actually think a lot of people are still asking what is a global defense bank and why it's actually a hot commodity for all these Canadian cities. So BC government did do an event last week. So as a partnership standing up with business leaders, quite a long list of business leaders on a private sector backed bid for this new multilateral defense, security, and resilience bank. So pushing here that this would be headquartered in Vancouver. But we also, as I said, several Canadian cities are campaigning to secure the headquarters. So it's about 3,500 jobs, always appealing, I think, right now, particularly as provinces are looking at economic impacts. But the Coles Note version is this is a financial institution to help fund defense, security, and resilience for NATO members and allied nations in member countries with loans. So it's sort of a global entity like the World Bank. And the goal is to have it up and running by the end of the year. So Canada's actually had a pretty leading role here in trying to form this bank as well. Prime Minister Carney and others in his government have been quite involved. It's a formed by an alliance of 13 leading nations, targeting about 40 member countries to be involved in this bank, and a lot of cooperation going on across the board. So with Canada in the running to house the bank as well, that's why we see provinces here putting themselves forward with major cities for consideration. All 6 major banks in Canada also have put their support into the bank. But Canada's in running with dozens of other countries. I think I saw somewhere about 40 other countries. And if Canada did win the bid, the prime minister actually, from my understanding, still needs to decide which Canadian city gets to have located in, which could be interesting if we are in a spring election speculation still, picking a city as prime minister. But I think, the home city for the bank positions that city as host for global security events. So, we're seeing BC position the province in terms of the geographic position with port and access to other countries as the advantage, talent pool around tech and innovation. Toronto's highlighting its current role as the country's financial hub. Ottawa's leaning in heavily to their federal institution proximity, defense and diplomatic community. And then Montreal's looking at that research and aerospace sector. So I think all roads here lead to just how quickly the geopolitical landscape has changed in the past year. Governments, putting money into places that weren't being considered last year, spending for border protection, securing supply chains, meeting commitments to allies around the country as allies also shift around the world. So, we'll have next steps here in March and see what happens in the weeks ahead.
We've definitely seen this fast pivot to all things leading back to defense spending. Hard to see that shifting in the near future, but probably a surprise for the public still. So, all right, let's take a break and we'll be back with Bynn Bourke, BC Building Trades Executive Director.
Bynn is Executive Director of the BC Building Trades, a board member of BC Hydro, and a longtime labor leader. Bynn, thanks for joining us today on the show. Trades are such a timely conversation as governments of all jurisdictions are prioritizing major projects, housing, infrastructure. I feel like every time I get in the car and turn on the radio, I'm hearing an ad from the federal government about how we're building Canada with these types of projects. And your members are in very high demand.
They certainly are. Well, first off, just thanks for inviting me on the podcast. I'm a fan. And yeah, I mean, I think definitely this is sort of the key issue of the day, and we see major investments like the BC government alone has committed about $45 billion to capital infrastructure projects. BC Hydro has committed, I think their 10-year capital plan is $36 billion. And our members are right in the middle of it. They're building the new Sello-Awesome Bridge to replace the Patello. They're working on the Broadway subway, Surrey Langley SkyTrain, the Cowichan District Hospital. And we also see a number of like high volume private sector projects that, that are kind of bubbling up, like the Silasams LNG project or the Red Chris Mine or Roberts Bank Terminal project. And so it's definitely a very dynamic time in construction, and our folks are right at the center of it.
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing it everywhere. I mean, I think expanding on that, I was at a recent business forum, and I think I see you at those forums as well, and those conferences where the business sector's talking about how to drive these projects, and always at those events, having more trades workers is the hot topic in the context of building the economy. So I think the question just always keeps coming back to needing more people to be trained to deliver on all of those projects, and those projects you just talked about as well. So I know that some governments are investing in trades training already, and you just spoke a little bit there to BC, but it's really key to your advocacy, and I know it's key to the advocacy of building trade unions across the country as well. Are any jurisdictions really getting this skills trade training right?
Well, and I think I might want to flip that a bit and talk about BC, because we're really playing catch up in British Columbia. And, I think most people know tradespeople don't just fall out of trees, right? We have to make them. And we do that through a robust apprenticeship system, right? One that can, recruit people in, has appropriate wraparound supports to assess their skills, place them into a trades training system, connect them with an employer, support them through their apprenticeship, both time during technical training and time on the job. And then they get their red seal. It requires a lot for us to have a robust trades training system. And we are rebuilding from basically a massive devastation that took place 20 years ago under the BC Liberal government, where they literally dismantled the Industry Training Apprenticeship Commission. They fired over 100, were laid off, over 100 staff, closed 16 regional offices, dismantled compulsory trades. And really, we have been very slowly building up from there. And there's been great policies since the BC NDP government came into place in 2017. They made commitments with community benefit agreements for apprentices on projects. They reformed the Industry Training Authority into Skilled Trades BC. They subsequently announced skilled trades certification and are bringing back compulsory trades, starting with some key electrical, sheet metal, mechanical trades.
Wow.
And the last big piece of that puzzle was announced in November, which was funding. Funding that is going to truly unlock the possibility to reimagine the trades training system and to give us what we need, both as union trainers who are training over 6,000 apprentices across our unionized system, but also the system. When I think back to what we had before 2001, where apprentices were actually connected to a counselor, they had a human being that they could call and say, like, I'm having trouble getting scheduled into class, or my employer really, they just have me turning, a screwdriver. I'm not getting the full scope of my trade. Can you help? They had a navigator, and all of that was blown away. And I think we've been, working under a system of scarcity for so long. We have an opportunity to build all those wraparounds again. So I think BC is on track. It's heading in a good way, and it's catching up with almost every other province that, to varying degrees, has been doing a better job than we were.
Yeah, which is, I think it's probably surprising to most people, right? Because I think it is that period of time, and I think you I had the privilege of being invited in by your team to your Women in the Trades conference a couple months ago. And so it is more than the training. It's what you're saying, right, on the retention, the recruitment, the keeping people actually in the trades as well that has to be built in. So lots to do there.
Yeah, I didn't realize, Bryn, that so much of the training infrastructure had been dismantled. I mean, for these to not be compulsory trades Ontario's had its problems with trades training, and it's been political at times, but it's never been disassembled by any party of any stripe. Anyway.
Like, when British Columbia did that, and like essentially the deregulation of the trades happened between 2001 and 2003, no other province followed. And think about the Conservative governments across the country who could have done the same thing that BC did and chose not to. It has been devastating for our system. And it's one of those things that you didn't feel it right away, right?
Sure.
So, you blow it all up, but you still had, a generation of tradespeople. Then they start to retire, right? And newer folks enter the system, newer folks who are not getting any technical training, right? Who are less skilled, who are kind of pigeonholed into sort of, one or two key competencies. And
Yeah.
maybe that works for a while in residential construction. But now when you're talking about sophisticated, massive projects, like the ones we've just executed, like LNG Canada or Site C, or what we're trying to do, you need millwrights, you need boilermakers.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
these are, key trades that we now have to truly try to backfill and get
And
new people in and give them the skills so that we have the qualified workers to build the projects that right now in this moment Canadians are counting on.
right.
Yeah.
So for a period, just sort of, I'm really quite astonished by this. So for a period, things like electricians, um, plumbers, millwrights, they were not compulsory. Like you could call yourself one of those things without having the training. Is this what I'm
Every single
hearing?
trade. Every
Wow,
single
I'd like my
trade in British
electrician to
Columbia.
have gone to
Yeah.
school and like be
Trained.
certified and frankly have a license that can be pulled if necessary.
Yeah.
So
That just
I will
seems
say every single
wild.
trade, every single trade, and up
Yes,
until from 2003 until about 2023, when
right.
skilled trade certification was brought back and
Yes.
electrician was listed as one of the first trades to be, remade compulsory. Um, they were dismantled. The one exception after all the trades were dismantled is crane operator,
Oh yeah. Well,
where in
like tower
2000
cranes.
tower crane,
Oh
mobile
my
crane.
God.
In
Yeah, let's just let
2000,
anybody get up there.
in
Right.
2006, 2007, 2008, in that time period,
Wow.
there was a recognition that obviously that was incredibly unsafe. And
Yes.
Yeah.
a requirement was created for for licensing.
Wow.
So, and
Yeah.
we are still in a place where we're trying to make tower crane operator a compulsory trade. And with the announcement in November, tower crane and mobile crane were listed
Yeah.
as ones that are next to be made compulsory, which means that you either need to be an apprentice or a journey, and that will slowly, I think, deal with this provisional licensing system
Yeah.
where people could take a test and essentially just keep renewing provisional licenses and never really having to do the deep methodical level of training that is required to operate
Yeah.
that kind of equipment.
Well, I do some research in another outlet of mine. It's called Data Shows, and I recently did a look at trades based on some StatsCan data, and based on that, actually, I mean, you guys look like you're in a pretty great spot. I took a look at 5 different trades: laborers, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, sheet metal workers in 5 different cities: Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax, and I compared their wage rates, which StatsCan tracks, against inflation. And of those 25 groups across the country, there were only 5 that have actually kept up to inflation during the period I was looking at, and 4 of them are in Vancouver. So
Hmm.
the rest of the country, and here in Ontario, we're having a really hard time, especially on the residential construction side. Like nothing is happening. It's a total
Mhm.
wipeout. But at any rate, I just wanted to, so something is definitely going right for you guys. So congrats. But the major project agenda, there's a lot going on by provinces and the federal government maybe is, well, we know they're going to do something. We don't know what they're going to do exactly. It's not going to deliver jobs immediately, but hopefully it builds the infrastructure and supports jobs long term, and that infrastructure is built by your trades, people you represent. But how do you, in your position, how do you try and make a project good policy, done right, skilled trades, quality work that's going to endure, and also good politics, so that workers, the employers, and the government can all kind of pull together and get this thing done with the right community involvement around it? I mean, this must be your daily concern.
Well, I think, for me, I do think a lot about this moment, and we're in a real inflection point, and I think maybe I want to pull you back a bit and want to talk about industrial construction and British Columbia. So for many years, my members paid their mortgage by working in industrial construction. A lot of my members would do, the maintenance work, the shutdown work on pulp and paper mills, and this was the bread and butter of British Columbia. And we have watched since the 2000s over 80 mills close in BC, and a real contraction. Mining has been stagnant, and we've called it a deindustrialization of the province, right? And at the same time, you kind of had the housing boom that the province was able to, generate revenue from, and there was a lot of high-rise residential activity that was kind of humming along. And now you have this complete flip where you've got, the housing market is at a total stall. You mentioned Toronto. Vancouver is very similar. And the government is trying to build its way, to improve the economy. Let's build our way out of this. And they've talked about it as an industrial strategy. In BC, they call it the Look West strategy.
Yes.
And, so there is a lot of opportunity for my members in looking at these kinds of large marquee projects that are going to be job creators, and job creators in rural BC. Some of the identified projects around critical minerals, the port work that's been identified, siliciums, LNG, stuff that's happening in the North Coast. Like these can be transformational for communities and for working people. But I think that the real key factor is going to be that we really center, what kind of jobs are we creating? Who is doing this work, and what is the legacy we're leaving? Are we employing local workers? Are we partnering with Indigenous communities? Are we creating opportunities for apprenticeships? Are these good union jobs? Are people going to be able to raise up their families with these wages? Are they safe? Are the workers qualified? And that is something that I am really focused on as I go into these, these business and, events like that, Nikki mentioned. There's a lot of people in the room and very few worker voices. And, I'm trying to shove my way into the space and say, look, I'm here, having the honor of representing 50,000 tradespeople, and you need them. But you know what? Let's talk about how we could do this the right way and create generational opportunity for our country. And we've seen it go very, very bad. Right. And I mean, there's examples like Stellantis, out of, I think, Windsor, and what happens there when you can, so green light business and you don't put guardrails around it. In BC, we had examples like HD Mining. We've also seen it on public projects like the Canada Line, where we were paying temporary foreign workers less than $4 an hour. So if you don't have guardrails on these projects, you leave them wide open to the lowest possible standards. And that weighs heavy in my mind as we sort of go through this process of building that economic recovery plan.
Yeah, for sure. The in Ontario, there's been a lot of money dangled in the auto industry, but not a lot of guardrails. And then when companies pull out, now they're having to fight to just try and get the money back. Anyway,
Huge announcement.
a little more
Huge
positively.
announcement yesterday on that.
Yeah. You have one other advantage in your sector, and this may not be so obvious to people, but that is sectoral bargaining. And so you're bargaining for entire regions within a trade, sheet metal workers within a whole area for all the sheet metal workers, no matter who they're employed by, right? So just get people, because there's talk about this from time to time, that maybe this is an industrial model for not just for people in the trades, but is it a model that we could do elsewhere? Healthcare, for example. I mean, some unions like SEIU are already kind of going in that direction. So that's an interesting feature. Just give us a little bit of the info on how the sectoral bargaining works. And I'm really curious, like, how do you see it helping, especially workers that are at a smaller enterprise who often, people in the labor room would say, well, that's the toughest kind of place to go and get people into a union and get them a union contract.
Well, I think I'm going to start with what it looks like sort of in construction, and then I want to pull up a bit higher. So in BC, under the Labor Relations Code, craft construction unions are required to bargain together. And so that happens through the British Columbia Bargaining Council of Building Trades Unions, or BUCBUCA2. Uh, and
Okay.
really, for good or bad, their fortunes are tied together. And what they do is negotiate across from the Construction Employer Association. It's called Construction Labor Relations, and they negotiate a standard collective agreement. And in essence, I guess if I'm going to simplify, this allows for example, a sheet metal worker to go and work for company A on a project and receive wages, benefits, pension. That project concludes, and that sheet metal worker can then go and work for company B or company C or company D. And over
Mhm.
the course of a year, that worker will work for multiple sheet metal companies that are unionized, and they'll make the same wages. Their benefits will go to the same place. Um, and so will their pension.
Right.
All the standards are the same. So it really allows maximum labor mobility.
Yeah,
And it works well.
the union labor hall system,
Yeah.
right?
And
The hiring
it
hall.
works very well for contractors,
Yeah.
their stability. And it allows workers to sort of port those working conditions across the sector. Now, it is porous, it is imperfect. There have been subsequent erosions to the power of our sector through revisions to the Labor Relations Code. So, I have lots of thoughts about how I would like to improve sectoral bargaining in
Right.
construction. Um, but that being said, I'm a big fan of sectoral bargaining, and I think that for things like gig workers, and workers who are the most marginalized, what
Mhm.
an opportunity. If you can create a sector with an employer group and create a standard agreement, and here's the key. If you can have that recognized and be able then to go to non-unionized workers and say, we have your collective agreement. You don't have to negotiate a new first collective agreement. It's all
Right.
right here. That will unlock so much opportunity and really, a powerful, powerful organizing tool.
Plus, for the previously non-union worker, they finish a job, they go back to the hall, they get assigned to the next job, right? So that makes a lot of sense. There is some of that going on. I know there's a little bit of work in other sectors, but what do you think about the applicability? Is it fair of you to comment, or fair of me to ask you to comment on how it works or how it could work in traditionally in industrial sectors, but could be
Yeah,
others.
I mean, I can't, I don't know, um, I'm not fully fully clear on the code for other groups, but what I would say is, I think the key there's some enabling language we have and some that
Mhm.
needs to be strengthened. But the key is to try to lock in. You have to create someone across the table. First, you need to create your labor side, and then who are you bargaining against, and together you become a sector. And in different, in different areas, that's harder. Like
Yeah.
you think about home care workers,
Yes.
where that is
Yeah.
incredibly individualized, right? And so I think you need more enabling legislation to be able to do that. Whereas construction is more the employer side is much more organized, so it's easier for us to sort of put a circle
Yeah.
around it and have the sector be clearer.
hmm hmm
Yeah. Thanks for that. So we're going to pivot, hard pivot, but I think a really important campaign as well that a lot of people might not be aware of. So you had a huge success in building trades a couple of years ago on a long time campaign for an issue most people don't even have to think about in their workplace, which is flush toilets. So, having worked on issues around access to menstrual products as basic necessities myself, and big thanks to building trades for also supporting that work here in BC. I know that people, unless they're experiencing it, don't understand the impact in your day if you can't access some of these basic necessities that we all just, generally walk into our office and are right there. Why did that take so much time? And what kind of issues are workers facing that made it a priority for your advocacy as a council?
Yeah, well, no, great question, Nikki. And I mean, this issue really, we've been arguing for flush toilets for decades. And we go back there bargaining proposals in the 70s around this.
Wow,
Um,
70s, yeah.
but
That's more than decades. That's decades and decades now.
decades and decades, decades. But I mean, I will, the flashpoint was COVID-19.
Yeah.
And, the COVID-19 pandemic was declared in I think March 2020. And the BC construction industry did not stop for not for one day.
Yeah.
Our industry continued to work full tilt right through the entire pandemic. And at that time, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
And you're talking about mixed sites, hundreds of people. You don't necessarily know the people you're working beside. In some cases, people showing up clearly sick and
Yeah.
we're told to wash our hands. We're told to keep our distance. There were no hand washing stations on site. We were fabricating options as we could. I mean, there's stories about hoses taped to 2x4s. And, we were doing everything we could to just get through. And that was what it was.
Yeah.
That, we were all doing our very best. But by April 2021, it became clear that the industry felt like that was good enough and that
Oh, wow. Yeah.
we'd done everything we could. And that was when we launched
Well, it was working, right? People were making it work.
So
Yeah.
that was when, a year into COVID, is when we actually
Yeah.
launched our campaign for flush toilets, because we were like, no, that was an emergency. Like, that's what we did when we had no other options.
Yeah.
We have options. The entire film, entertainment, and tourism industry uses flush toilet trailers. Like, this is
Yeah.
insane that we would not learn from this at all, and that we would just go back to, to where it was. And weren't we heroes? Weren't construction workers carrying the economy on their back?
Yeah.
And we're just, gonna let that all slide. So that was the major flashpoint, and we began to push. And we started pushing inside, trying to use the pre-existing occupational health and safety regulations. And when we didn't get anywhere, we said, you need to change the regulations. You
Yeah.
need to require this. And I am really pleased that as of October 2024, those are required, and you have to have flush toilets available on construction sites of 25 workers or more. And it's a huge matter. I mean, not just of health
Yeah.
and safety, it's a huge matter of dignity. I mean, the ability to wash your hands before you eat your
Yeah.
lunch, the dignity of being able to clean yourself appropriately, like, it is so basic. I'm glad it's a victory that we've secured, and it's one that
Yeah.
needs to make sure we now drive into the culture of construction in every corner of the province.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it's one of those things people don't think about unless they're facing it. And when you explain the why, you're like, oh, of course, I've never seen that on a construction site I've walked by. It's always porta potties when they think about it. I think, too, in the pandemic, we saw a lot of those higher end, well used washrooms go into places like the downtown east side of Vancouver. All gone now, really, right? Like, these are solutions that exist. They were put in place when we needed them, and then they, disappear if we don't put them into the legislation. So it's great work, and I think there's all kinds of stories as you normalize the conversation about other sectors. Like, I think of stories I've heard from longshore workers in the menstrual equity space, and that also applied then to the fact that no one was paying attention to the lack of washrooms for those workers too on ships and other facilities. So it just normalizes these basic conversations, I think. So great job there.
Absolutely. No, and I've said, like, farm workers as well. I will stand.
Yeah.
We'll stand shoulder to shoulder. Like, we didn't secure this for construction, and we're done.
Yeah.
We extend our solidarity out to any worker that needs it,
Yeah.
and we'll stand with you to extend the fight.
Yeah. Well,
That's great.
let's just switch back for a second. We were talking about some major projects and their importance, major private sector projects, but also, public sector projects, and their importance to your members. But it's also, very important to a lot of other factors in our society, our environment and the communities that these projects happen in. And I think you've been kind of insistent on workers being involved in the regulatory process. And why do you like? What is the role of trades in regulatory process, and how do you think you're able to influence decisions around like local hiring requirements or fair wage requirements, First Nations, Indigenous people getting hired, these kind of things that are part of maybe a broader agenda, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I think that, we have both provincial and federal governments that the province created a major project list and
Hmm.
started listing projects. And now the federal government has done that. They've created the major projects office, and they're um, starting to offer sort of a basket of tools to industry to advance these projects. Some of those tools being sort of fast tracking. I imagine financing in some capacity will come to the table. And if we are going to actually use the tools of government to support these projects, government should ask for something in return, right? If the
Hmm.
public is supporting and enabling this work to take place, then we should also require there to be provisions on procurement that benefit British Columbians and Canadians, right? And so I do think it's the give and take um, uh, in this moment, and it's completely reasonable to say, um, how many local jobs are going to be created, what are your apprenticeship strategies. We've been pushing for prevailing wage on projects, as
Hmm.
well as project labor agreements for unionized trades. Like, there's a bunch of tools that can help to make sure that we maximize benefits for local people through that process. But I think it's incredibly fair of governments to require projects to do this.
Yeah, nobody likes a big project plopping down in the neighborhood and nobody in the neighborhood gets a job. That just doesn't feel right, does it?
Yeah, and then it's gone and you don't have the right housing and the community's been impacted. So I
Yeah.
think that's huge. This has been really great, Bryn. Thanks for joining us and unpacking so many issues right now. I think I do think about when I'm in those rooms in the business sector, which I'm in a lot, and they're talking about trades, and I'm like, where is everybody? Right? You're one of the faces I do see, but it is that having people at those tables and those conversations and those regulatory creation is so important as well. So we appreciate all you do and the voice that you're bringing.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, great interview. I really enjoyed hearing about the positivity that Bryn is bringing to the work that she is doing and the projects, and it's good to hear that the trades are doing well. And to me, also, Nikki, I worked in the labor movement most of my life, and I've always felt that the labor movement occupies a very important part in the idea of social democracy. That parties come and go, but to the
Yeah.
degree that a party can help build things like sectoral bargaining or the certification systems that she was talking about, that I was stunned to hear got dismantled by your predecessors. I mean,
Yeah.
that is important. That is building social democracy. It's not just having a social democratic political party in place. It's being able to change the structures of a society, make it a social democratic society. So I find that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, and I don't know, appealing, enthusing, I guess.
It's interesting. I was thinking as Byrne was talking, because I was listening to an interview with one of the BC Conservative leadership candidates this week, and on another show, and that person was a cabinet minister in the previous government. So that '01 mark for folks who don't track BC politics as well was when the government changed from the NDP to the BC Liberals, and so change in policy. But what was really striking to me, I think, because I was thinking about it after listening to this interview with one of the candidates, is he was talking about how infrastructure projects themselves shouldn't be partisan, right? It's that how you don't change them after an election or look at them as something that were the previous governments. But I really think skilled trades fall into that category as well, because that hindsight of what impact and being able to build the economy here and in other jurisdictions is
Well,
so huge when you don't have the trades to do
if
it. So
if you're
and so that's got to be like, skilled
yeah.
trades are not a partisan issue. They're so critical to that economic growth.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, in Ontario, it has become a bit of a partisan issue in the worst possible way. We've had fairly good standards for training for a long time. There have been some moves to change it on the Liberals, and then a different change, but they were just changes of administration. So, it just blows my mind to think that a political party would want to come into power and destroy the knowledge base of the construction industry. And it's like, that's wacky to me. At any rate, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back with Love It or Heave It.
Before we wrap up, we're at that part of the show we call Love It or Heave It, about something we love and want to keep, or something we would like to heave and forever forget. What do you have this week, Tom?
Well, I am loving what we might call the Bad Bunny Doctrine, Nikki, which reminds us, Canadians, we are part of the Americas. Prime Minister Carney has made the point about middle powers sticking together, enforcing rule of law for all. European middle powers did do that with Greenland. They stood up together after rule of law in Greenland. Trump backed down. Good job. But if our security is strengthened by joining middle powers to set rules of law that protect all states, it is not our security advantage to be Eurocentric and abandon the Americas. That's the Bad Bunny part. The Americas are our neighborhood, and all states here have a common problem, which is Trump's doctrine, which is to control the Americas and take what is ours by illegal force, by blockades, by tariffs, by sanctions. There are middle powers in the Americas, like Mexico and Brazil, that support rule of law, but Carney right now isn't backing them up in their defense of rule of law as Trump puts an illegal blockade on Cuba. Of course, there's a massive humanitarian issue here, but let's be brutally self-interested as well. Canada is on Trump's hit list. If he picks off Cuba, we move up one spot. And if Carney ducks and dumps it on Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and Brazil President Luis Lula da Silva to protect rule of law in the Americas, he is undermining them, and he is undermining our own strength. So I'm loving the Bad Bunny Doctrine because it reminds us that building relationships with middle powers that defend rule of law here in the Americas builds our own strength. So let's do that.
Thanks, Tom. I'm loving anything Bad Bunny this week. I think that's sort of the gist of everyone. That gave Bad Bunny's given a lot of joy to folks this week and made a lot of MAGA folks mad. So
it's
win-win.
It's an interesting Pan-American kind of idea that he expressed, and I think timely thought for us.
Yeah, Nikki, making a lot of people think.
Yeah. What are you doing this week? Loving or heaving?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a serious tone to the heave this week. And I want to go back into, what we talked about in our introduction about Tumbler Ridge and the tragedy there. And so I think, for those of us in BC who were seeing some of the news earlier, we were also seeing a couple of other things evolve really quickly. So, on the Tuesday where we were starting to hear sort of in the after work hours about what had been happening in Tumbler Ridge, as parents were still waiting to hear if their kids had made it home from school that day or being medevac down to Vancouver. We saw something very disturbing happening really immediately online, which was, and I think going back into our conversation last week too about some of these far right influencers, some of them being at the Conservative Convention, jumped online very quickly. And really in this initial period where, again, we really didn't know what had happened, people were still being informed about their family members, did some amateur sleuthing on social media and started to provide some very dangerous anti-trans rhetoric. We saw that amplified by large influencers like Elon Musk, who has been really driving this anti-trans effort that's been going on for years. So, as you got these just tragic incidents, we're talking 12, 13-year-olds here in Tumbler Ridge. And what's happened this week is a few things. One is that those parents have had to go to the media and actually ask people to stop this activity, ask those influencers to stop going for clicks and to start actually talking about their kids and not spreading this rhetoric and hate. And so I really think this week about, in our heave, it's that not using our channels to make life more unsafe for kids, for trans kids, not forcing people who are going through a tragedy to have to be responsive and ask you to stop. I think about the kids this week, the kids who are also trans in my life who were, worried about their safety and what this would be doing out if they go out in public. So, trans folks are already at a great risk of violence. And I think that's been increased this week in a very sad situation when people are suffering from unimaginable loss. So, in the words of a wise friend, if you were one of those people, and we had an MLA here in BC actually who was driving a lot of it, where the rest across parties in the legislature were standing very united and acting appropriately. We saw one MLA not doing so. But, if you're one of those folks who was driving clicks with this rhetoric this week, do better, be smarter, and just do better at humaning next week.
Yeah, in these moments when people are dealing with such profound pain, it's the time to show love and comfort.
Yeah, and to really center the people. Yeah. Okay, well, that is our week on a somber note there, as people are still struggling to come to terms with what actually happened. So thanks so much for joining us for Left, East to West, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Take care.
Thanks for joining Left, East to West with hosts Nikki Hill and Tom Parkin. We'd love to hear your comments, ratings, follows, and shares. It helps people find us. To become a Left, East to West community member and to help us reach even more Canadians, subscribe using the link in the show notes. You can watch us on YouTube or listen wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just search for Left, East to West and subscribe. I'm Doug Hamilton signing off for Left, East to West. We'll see you next week.